My name is Chandra, and I work at the museum. And we put on the brown bag lectures every Tuesday from September all the way to March, with a little break for Christmas. We're on our penultimate presentation. I always like to use that word whenever I get a chance. And we have Paul Crawford from the Penticton Art Gallery. He is the curator there. And I have known about Julia Bullock-Webster since I started working at the museum. And I wanted to know a little bit more about her. And then I found out that the art gallery has artwork by Julia Bullock-Webster. So I thought we should find out more about her and see her artwork. So I invited Paul to come.
Perfect.
Yeah. So without further ado, because I know you've already turned off your cell phones, I will pass it on to Paul.
Excellent. Thank you all very much. Thank you to the museum. It's such a wonderful series this is, and I feel honored. Does this sound okay to everybody? Okay. I feel honored to have the opportunity to come down and share a little bit of our collection with you. It's not just the Penticton Art Gallery's collection, it's City of Penticton. Well, it's not the City of Penticton's, it's the art galleries, but it's all of our collection, because our collection, much like the museum here collection, is kept in trust for the citizens of Penticton and of British Columbia in perpetuity. And I'm honored to come down here to talk about Julia Bullock-Webster myself. It's a bit of a journey of discovery for me. I've known this work has been in our collection for a long time. I've pulled works out of the collection for exhibitions on time to time, and it prompted me to revisit those works that had been sitting in a drawer in our vault, and also go online and try to find out some more about her. And unfortunately, she's an artist that is very little known about. We know a certain amount about her, but we don't know much more than her time here in the Similkameen Valley. I just also want to acknowledge that, I'm grateful that we're here on the traditional territories of the Okanagan Silt people, and grateful to talk a little bit about the colonialist history of our region here as well. But and setting this up, and if I get too long-winded, just tell me to move it on. I'm happy to do that, and I won't take any offense to it. But I'm going to start off with a bit of a digression here, because I think it's really hard sometimes for people to sort of appreciate just how young our history is. And as I was as a young lad myself, I had some very impactful things help me in my journey that at the time I couldn't have understood what they meant to me, but they've steered the course of my life and led me to where I am standing here in front of you here today. So I hope to illustrate one of those examples with you here today. One of those things was collecting stamps was hugely important, and there's a 50th anniversary of the local stamp club happening next Sunday. And you're all invited to come to that. It's an amazing journey, and I would highly recommend stamp collecting to any youth. It was certainly one of the best educations I had growing up. Another thing was, as 12 years old, I met this artist, Alvin Constant, for 10 minutes outside the Hudson Bay building in Vancouver waiting for the bus. And just 2 weeks ago, we opened an exhibition of his work at the Penticton Art Gallery, and if you have an opportunity to come down and see that, it speaks about so many things that are affecting our society today. The legacy of the residential school, addiction, Indigenous art history, much as we will talk about this today, what makes art history and what isn't art history, why are things considered to be worthy of museums and why aren't they. It also talks about homelessness and so many different things. Alvin unfortunately passed away in 2006 in Calgary. He froze on the streets of Calgary on November the 24th in 2006, a block away from the homeless shelter. And looking out on our streets here, it's something we can't avoid any time now, and it certainly seems to be getting worse every time. So if you have a time, I would certainly love to have you come down and check out that show at the gallery. But to get back on track, when I was thinking about this talk, I was thinking about, Julia Bullock-Webster came to the Similkameen Valley in 1894, traveled from Europe, which is a remarkable thing in itself. But I just thought I'd put that in perspective in a small way. Recently, I was on an auction site. I collect stuff. And I saw this piece advertised. It was advertised as an argillite, or not argillite, it was advertised as a Victorian carved slate plate. And I put a keyword in there, Vancouver, and that's why it came to me. And so I saw this thing online, and I knew exactly what it was when I first saw it. And it's got an inscription. I found there's lots of these online. So they're argillite. They're made by the Haida people. And they were sold to tourists, to the Hudson Bay Factor people, and to take back as a souvenir of their time here on the West Coast in the early part of the 19th century, and throughout the whole 19th century for that matter. But what was remarkable about this plate here when I found it is it has an inscription on it. And while there are lots of them, and the plate itself is carved to look like pressed glass, Victorian pressed glass. That's what they saw, that's what they figured that the tourists would like, as something that they could relate to, rather than totem poles and things like that, or they make pipes and things like that. And as the potlatches and their art got increasingly banned, they increasingly made more things that were for the tourist market. So this is an artist that would have been from the Haida Gwaii, or up from Alaska, who had come down to Victoria, carved this for the tourist trade. But as I said, the inscription on it is quite remarkable. It reads, "Presented by Miss C. Cameron to Mr. H. Campion, coxswain of the Alma, winner of the Royal Vancouver Canoe Regatta, October 27th, 1855. So I thought, oh, Royal Vancouver Canoe Regatta, that's amazing. But then it dawned on me, Vancouver didn't exist until 1886. So the Royal Vancouver Canoe Regatta would have been in Victoria. Victoria at that time was its own crown colony of Vancouver Island. And I got thinking about that as well. So I decided to do some research on that. I wrote to the Royal BC Museum, and they wrote back, and they have no records prior to 1858, when British Columbia became the two crown colonies of Vancouver Island and British Columbia joined to one thing. And so Victoria at that time was a Hudson Bay Factor fort. It had been established in 1847. Captain George Vancouver had only mapped the coastline of British Columbia in 1791 to 1795. So this plate is 60 years, essentially, after the whole coastline had first been mapped. I have a map from this time of British Columbia, and it's beautiful because it was from 1861, and it shows a gold rush. And it shows a trail up the Fraser Canyon to Barkerville. But everything beyond that is just blank, and it says big, sharp, pointy peaks, or something like that. It's remarkable. But just to give it also in perspective here, in 1853, there was only 450 people living on Vancouver Island. 300 of those people were living in Victoria. In 1854, the number jumped up a little bit to 774 people living on the island. This is non-Indigenous people. Excuse me. Half of those were children under the age of 20, 180 girls and 170 boys, and for a total of 358, and no less than 240 of those were under the age of 10. So the entire population of non-Indigenous people living on Vancouver Island in 1854 was less than 800 people. Just think about that. That's how current and new our province is. And so when you think about 1895 in the Similkameen Valley, it's not much different than that. There weren't a whole lot of non-Indigenous people living here. And that's only like 130 years from where we stand here today. So I just want to put that in perspective, because our history here is so new as a colonialist history here. Like the Indigenous history goes back millennium, but our interaction here is so recent, and that plate there really sort of cemented in my mind just how recent that history is and how few of us were living here. And just think about in the last 150 years just how much we've impacted this landscape, the culture and everything else here, and all that as well. So I don't know why I told that story, but anyhow, I thought it was interesting. I just wanted to share my plate with you. Anyhow, back to where we are. So to Julia Bullock-Webster. I threw away my notes, which was really foolish. So this is a portrait of Julia Bullock-Webster, a self-portrait of her, age 25, approximately 1849. This is in the collection of the gallery, and this is a photograph of her husband, a cabinet card from 1851, also in the collection of the gallery. So, like I said, very little is known about Julia Bullock-Webster. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you a synopsis of her life story as best as has been recorded and what I can find. And then we're going to go through, look at the work that she did, and talk a little bit about that. So Julia was born, they believe, in 1826 in Tenby, Pembrokeshire in England. She's very little is known until she got married to Captain Thomas Bullock-Webster. He was born in 1820, and he was with the Bombay Light Infantry. And on the 12th of November, 1849, he was on leave in Paris, and the two of them got married. And they would go on to have 7 children, and they would travel extensively throughout sort of Africa and through South Asia, and then back to here. He would die in 1872. So he left the army in 1853, and they moved to South Africa for 2 years between 1853 and August of 1854. While there, they had a son, and they lived in Stellenbosch to start off with. And it's interesting, there's a collection of her botanicals and watercolors that's in the collection there at the University of Stellenbosch. Then they moved to Cape Town in 1855 and created a bunch of watercolors down there, which have been found in collections down there. Excuse me. After that, they moved to India for a brief period. Thomas was appointed to be the deputy collector for the district of Sindh, which is north of Bombay, and then returned to England around 1858, where they had a son, George, there, and he was christened at Eton Bishop, Hertfordshire that year. William Howard was also christened there in 1867. So her husband, as I said, died in 1872, and Julia would continue to live in Hertfordshire, Wales, and then she moved to Wales, and then to the south of England. And at the time of her journey to Canada in 1894, she was living in Oxford with her 2 daughters, Helen and Evelyn. Yeah, they went by Izzy and Eliza. She was 80 years old. She was 60 years old. She was in her late 60s in 1894, when she embarked on this journey to Canada. Her 2 sons had moved here previously. They had settled in the Similkameen Valley, and so they moved here in 1887. Edward created a homestead just near the grist mill outside Keremeos, and her other son, William, served as chief constable for the provincial police force in 1892 and would later go on to be a barrister. The other son, Edward, would eventually move to Penticton after selling his homestead down in Keremeos and invest in a bunch of local businesses here and became a noted business person. So to get here to Canada, this is what Julia and her 2 daughters did. They traveled from Oxford to Liverpool. There they got on a steamship across the Atlantic Ocean to the St. Lawrence. Then she got to the prairies by rail, and then got to British Columbia, where they took a paddle steamer from the north of the lake all the way down to Penticton, and stagecoach to get down to meet her sons in Keremeos, arriving there in August of 1894. They would remain there until 1896. The thing that's really remarkable about this, here we are, there's their marriage certificate. And this is beautiful. This is also in the collection of the gallery. This is a little portrait here of Julia. There's 2 of them, 2 miniatures, both done by John Jules Nemo in Paris, and they were wedding gifts to Julia's mother from her husband. And those are 2 portraits from about 1849, or the dated 1851. This is the tools of her trade. I'm always fascinated by the tools of an artist's trade. These are some of her painting palettes that are in the collection. The first one is made out of porcelain, and this is her little painting box here, and it's enameled steel with the colors on there as well. And then she would do that's another little ivory palette she had, and then she would work on these little ivory little panels occasionally and do miniature portraits, and there's an unfinished work there. So what did she just start painting? So one of the interesting things that I find about women artists, and one of the things that I've always been fascinated on why their work is I think of great significance, is as part of a young Victorian woman's finishing school, they would learn how to, paint and do things like that. And I find, but they were never considered artists. That's the sad part of it all. They were hobbyists, and their work to this day seems to be, flights of fancy. They were hobbyists. Their work, as much as I think it's really important, and why I think it's important is because I think they actually painted things that are more real. They didn't have the bravado of a lot of their male counterparts. Their work really captured a moment there because there was no expectation of it doing anything other than just sort of filling a journal or a diary or anything else. But Julia painted throughout her entire life. And so here's one from 1859 of a little watercolor there. And these are all works that are in our collection. Another one there from 1859. And these are all sort of large scale. It's actually remarkable. Like they're not insignificantly small works. They're all larger watercolors here. Here's a picture of Wales, 1871. And she would just sort of document her travels as she traveled across England. Harlech Castle, Wales, 1874. This is when they were living in France, 1878. That's their house. I love this one here, the view from the Botanical Gardens, 1880. Julia always had a fascination with the flora, and the fauna of where she went, and she was noted for doing little botanical studies, and the work that's in the museum in South Africa there is largely lots of her botanicals that she would do down there as well. And that's the other thing too, a lot of these women artists would do that. They would paint botanicals and do these little beautiful studies of things like that as well that their male counterparts typically wouldn't pay much attention to, and they provided an invaluable record of what was growing here at that time, or anywhere for that matter. So there's one there, another one from France. And I think certainly I think she's a well-accomplished artist. Lovely one here, 1886. Vancouver was established as a city in 1886. The railway finally came across Canada that year. Swansea, 1889. Lizard Point, 1892. And then 1892 again, their house in Cornwall. So as I said, she arrived in Keremeos in 1894. And one of the great gifts that she left us were these incredible diaries that sort of documented her existence there at the time. She would document the weather, and she would document goings-ons, comings and goings, and things like that. And Kyler Page, back in the 1990s, discovered these diaries that were in the provincial archives, and with their team at the gristmill there, made an incredible transcription of all those diaries. And it's really helped inform the programming down to the gristmill, and Chris Matheson's the director down there right now, and I know they've suffered greatly the last couple of years with the effects of the pandemic and everything else. And if you're able to, you can buy a season's pass. I put a plug in because I got an email, but it's an incredibly important sort of window into part of our history, and it tells a particular chapter of that history. And the Bullock-Websters were really certainly very integral into that history as well, and they actually have a garden, a wildflower garden down there that they've done based upon the floral paintings botanical studies that Julia did, and have created this garden in her memory there. But these are some of the earliest views that we have of that region there, and you can go out, and if you take these images, you can figure out roughly where she was painting them, and you can follow her journey throughout the valley there. But yeah, they are these wonderful things, because photography was in existence, but it was, not everything was being photographed. It was a real process to do that. So these quick sketches that were done by Julia Bullock-Webster and a number of other artists are some of the earliest recorded images we have of these regions of our province, and proved to be invaluable in terms of just sort of looking at growth and development and what the place looked like before it got really crazy. So I'm going to just sort of skip through a bunch of these things. Her paintings are, I put too many slides in, and so I wanted to share everything with you as much as I could. So we'll go through them here, and if you have any questions, we can just sort of stop along the way. Here's another one here, Three Mountains, 1894. This is their homestead down there, and I thought it was interesting just taking a picture of the whole sheet of paper so you could sort of see how she worked. The water went out there, or she was sampling some of the colors on the side of the page as well. Here we are looking east from the Ashinola, October 1895. I think this is actually done on my birthday, October the 23rd, this one. Mountain cloud cover, 1895. Looking toward from the Similkameen, 1895. Path down the river to Keremeos, 1895. Beautiful one here, sort of from Costin. And all these works came to the collection, to the gallery through, I think it's a grandniece, Barbara Steele, donated them to the gallery in 1983. And then later in the 1980s, we received a larger donation of works from Wales. A lot of those earlier works, we received those as a transfer from the Art Gallery, Greater Victoria, that had them in their collection. So April 1896, towards Headley.
Barbara Steele.
Barbara Steele is the grandniece. I think it's the niece of the artist, yeah. And then, but like I said, she was also noted for her botanicals. And so we're going to go back a little bit before she got here, but to give you a sample of some of the works that she did. And I brought one of them here for you to see because I don't think the images here are going to do them justice. There is a wonderful article from the university in South Africa, and it was a retiring I guess he was a curator there maybe, or a collections manager, and was talking about some of his favorite objects that he worked on in his time there. And he said the detail in these miniature watercolors of Julia Bullock-Webster were mind-boggling. Yeah, you'd have to really get up close to see them. So I brought one here you can have a look at here today. Yeah. I'm not a gardener, so when we get, if there's some here that you can give me the flowers, that they are the real names, or if there's a mistake, I would certainly appreciate it. And these are all probably about this size. Like, there's not, like, she wasn't carrying around a tiny little sketchbook. These are all actually a fair size, as you can see. These are the smaller ones. But the larger ones would probably be twice that size. So I'll put that there. We can have a look at that afterwards. Stitch work. But yeah, they're really quite lovely things. She would go out and collect these little bundles of flowers and sort of faithfully document them and then date them and try to get the Latin names with them as well. I don't think she got them all right all the time, but to the best of her capacity with her knowledge, she couldn't go to Google and just Google up what it is, and she was also, taking things that she knew from back home and making, suppositions that that's what this was here. But these are all, done before she got here, but when we get to, so from North Wales and things like that. And the papers, she would use different colored papers and things like that. Not many of them are on white paper. A lot of them are sort of a gray paper or a brown paper. So this is, now she's here in the Similkameen, and so these are all flowers that she documented, and probably the first real record of what some of the native plant species and flower species were in the Similkameen Valley there before agriculture came in, and we started introducing all these invasive species. So it's really a really important document of a snapshot in time that would be really hard to try to figure out now with all the contamination of what's happened down there, what was actually growing there. And she would certainly choose the seasons, and so her paintings would evolve with the seasons, and she would choose the flowers that were in season at that time here. So a little sampling of these. So April. Really quite stunning. And the thing I love about too, because her diary would also talk about the weather and things like that. So again, probably some of the earliest weather records that we have of the Similkameen Valley on a consistent basis, and the comings and goings of who was coming. There was a dentist up in Barkerville who was renowned for that as well. His diaries. He was a black man. He was not a dentist. Sorry, he was a barber up there, and he kept incredible diaries. Documented the dailies, comings and goings, but also the weather and stuff like that. There is no other record of that. Like, it is the first real sort of comprehensive thing. And so these early people who just, it's just really quite remarkable that people would do that, and then they would be kept and saved. And that's where these archives are so valuable. Pink daisies, the one there with the root ball still attached to it.
So, Paul, did you come up with the names for them, or are they with?
That's what's in our collection thing.
Because you can tell what species they are based on the detail which she got. Because if you go back to the pink daisies,
Yeah.
it's a phlox.
Perfect. Well, that's what I need. I need somebody to come down with me. And if anybody wants to come down, I'd love to pull them all out, and we can go through there. We can get the proper, if anybody could give proper attributions to what species these all are, it'd be really lovely to do that. I just cut and paste out of our accession, our database there, and it kind of, it's one of those things that's frustrating. So it would be lovely to have more information about what these are, and hopefully this could help here. Actually, I was watching a wonderful show the other day about this archaeological dig that's happening in England right now, and they're putting like a motorway in, and they got to deal with this right now because the train and the motorway are going in, and they've only got a limited amount of time to do a survey of this piece of property. And the curator came up with this incredible idea that we're going to train the general public to come in to help us conserve and document these pieces. And so they set up in a shopping mall and have all these priceless artifacts, and you could just sort of go in, take a half an hour course, and be given a little paintbrush and go in and start clearing up things. And I think it's valuable to get people interested and engaged in this process of why these things are valuable and get that input, because as long as they remain in a drawer, they're of no value to anybody other than somebody looking after finding them years from now. So if there is anybody who would love to come down and work with me on sort of better identifying what these are, I would certainly love that opportunity, and would love to properly honor these for what they are. Yeah, so the little guy there, and that one, does anybody know what that is?
It's a fish or a local weed.
Okay, perfect. And then a little lily, I think that's right. Looks like a.
And then the shooting stars.
Okay.
And then there's the saxifrage.
Ah. And I think this is balsam, right? Yeah. I didn't have a title. I put that in there, so I got one right. All right. Sorry. You can tell my wife does the gardening. So I have to take for granted that was actually written on there, but it was, I hope that was right. I Googled that up, and it seemed legitimate. Some of them she did put the Latin in, but I couldn't make her out her handwriting. I think whoever cataloged these originally too couldn't make out the handwriting, so just sort of made up what they thought it was. And I think in the 80s we didn't have Google, so they basically just kind of phonetically spelt them out. But yeah, so it's a wonderful collection of stuff, and I've often thought it'd be really lovely to make art cards on this, and there's so much more to try to do with this collection. I'd love to see about trying to bring it to greater light, and we've talked with the grist mill about doing some work with them on it as well. But I'm really sort of getting excited about the prospects of crowdsourcing exhibitions and sharing knowledge and trying to engage the public in our art history and history in ways that maybe have not been thought about in the past, because it is so important, all this stuff, and when she was doing this, there was never any expectations that we would be sitting here 125 years later looking at these pictures or thinking anything important about them. She was just doing this as a hobby to pass the time and to sort of as a memento for her own stay there. And the irony is, like, a lot of these artists, like there was lots of artists, and mostly women, of means who would come over here. And the thing is that people think about in the Okanagan or in British Columbia, in the 1890s and the 1800s, that this was a backwater, piece of the empire where nobody of any, and no learned people were here. But the reality is you had a lot of very well-educated people here who are incredibly well-connected to the literary art scenes, cultural scenes across the world. But yeah, they just sort of ended up here through whatever means, but brought this worldview with them that is probably far greater than you would find today here. Like I think people are more mobile, are less mobile today. They're more sedentary, and it's amazing because these people would come over for a 2-year stint, but they would bring this entire incredible worldview and all these connections to other communities and everything else, and bring that here for the brief period that they have, and then leave. And so it was a really interesting piece of our history with a real it was a real intellectual hot pot in some regards. And a lot of these artists would come and do work here, but they would take it away with them. So these works were never shown here, and you find them in collections showing up in Europe, like this plate, like they show up in random places because the beautiful thing about this stuff, it travels, it moves, and these people moved, and these works and things move with them. And so to be able to find an archive like this and bring it back here is truly remarkable and incredibly important. And I would imagine there's all sorts of incredible things lurking in the archives here that have been brought back from other places or just left here and forgotten until such time that somebody looked at it a little bit differently and saw something interesting in it and decided to delve into it. So this is towards the end. Oh no, she left the next year, so yeah. And it's interesting, there's that little wild rose one she did there in Wales, which is not too dissimilar from this one here. But it would be lovely to do have a wild plant tour and stuff and see what we could do with this. This is another portrait of hers. This is in the collection of the Art Gallery of Victoria still. It was supposed to be transferred to us, but for whatever reason it never did. So there it lies in their collection down there in Victoria. And I'm not too sure who it is. It could be, I think it's too youthful to be her, but they dated it as 1892. And then this apparently is a photo of Julia just before her death in her living room back in Oxford in England. And there she is, looking a little bit like Queen Victoria. I kind of have my doubts whether that is Julia, but I gotta believe what it says on the caption on the photograph. So I'd love to do a facial recognition thing on it, because there's another photo there, I think it's of Julia's mother, that looks a lot like, but again, her mother would have been long since dead in the 1990s, 1890s. But it's interesting how certain people also capture a bit of pop culture interest. And a friend of mine, Christine Pilgrim, she's an actress and an interpreter who I met up in Barkerville in the 1990s, lives up in Vernon. She created a one-woman play, drawing inspiration when Kyler Page also was connected to Barkerville. So the two of them knew each other. And when Kyler discovered these diaries and started doing this whole sort of translation of them, or this recording of them, it sort of caught the imagination of a number of people, and Christine Pilgrim being one of them. And for a number of years, she had this one-woman play sort of traveling up and down the Okanagan and throughout the province on the lives of Julia Bullock-Webster, on the life of Julia Bullock-Webster, and would sort of create this opportunity where the public could get engaged and would end up painting a painting with her as well as part of the performance. In 2010, I had an artist by the name of Tricia Selmer, who lives out in Kelowna and in Kamloops now. She grew up in the Similkameen Valley, and her family was a homesteader down there. And she came to the gallery and dove into the collection and wanted to do a two-person show. So she did an exhibition on of her works in response to her experiences growing up in the Similkameen Valley, sort of playing off of Julia Bullock-Webster. It's not the best painting to represent the exhibition, but unfortunately it was the only one I could find in online in my computer at the moment. So, but yeah, the show was for the 21st of May to the 9th of July in 2020. There is a book, so Julia is starting to gain greater recognition, and I think in general, the art history done by women artists is starting to grow in recognition as well, and in its importance. And I think a lot of people are recognizing, while amateurs, and I say that in quotation marks, considered amateurs, their work actually is incredibly important. And when I was getting into this whole business in the early 90s, I would always, I started collecting women artists myself, especially around Victoria, because as I said, these people would travel, these women would travel and make these incredible sketches and documentations of their travels, and often of places that you wouldn't normally see. And one of the artists, you have the exceptions like Emily Carr, but there's like an entire huge number of artists that, if you're lucky enough to find their works, they're really quite remarkable. And one artist that I was really interested at the time was a woman by the name of Rose Bullen, and she was the daughter of James Douglas. And so she had means, and she had money, and she had access to a car back in the day, and she would travel all across Vancouver Island into Washington State, up and down the coast to these remote villages, and would do these incredible paintings, not unlike Julia Bullock-Webster, where she would, on the back of each piece, she would document, Saturday, 12th of August, 1911, I'm in Annex, BC, painted between 12:30 and 1 p.m., weather was warm with a slight westerly breeze. And she'll put all this information on the back of her paintings. But, she kind of fell out of favor and everything else. And if you can pick up her works, unfortunately, if you find one work by somebody, it doesn't mean much of anything. But if you can find a body of work, then you can actually do something really interesting with it. And a lot of these people, finding that body of work is what really is challenging. But there was a whole host of them. Here in the Valley, we had a woman by the name of Isabel Marjorie Banks Gordon that settled here also in the 1890s. A lady, Aberdeen, was also here for a while in the 1890s. And a woman up in Beachland came here in the 1916, Elise Compton, were all documenting this. And there's other amazing women too that were doing this, but they were never, as I said, they were never considered to be fine artists, and their work, for the most part, was never included in any shows of significance other than, say, the Victoria Sketch Club would do their annual show, or the British Columbia Society of Artists would have like an annual show. And if you go through those records and you look at them, how many of those artists were women? But how many of those artists are recorded today? Very few of them. But so many of them, amateur artists, were doing these incredible works that if you're lucky enough to come across their works now, are really quite remarkable. Up in the Shuswap, there was a male artist by the name of Charles John Collins who settled up there in 1910, and he has a house, and it was just up for sale a couple of years ago. It's a heritage site now up on the Shuswap, and he was selling his paintings, beautiful ethereal watercolors, and he had a dealer in London that couldn't sell enough of his works. Remarkable to think that someone living in London would care about a misty lake scene from the Shuswap Lake. But yeah, very few of these works were shown here at that time. Uno Langman in Vancouver's done an incredible job buying back this whole collection and donating to public collections as well. Anyhow, but I digress. But as I said, there's been, over the last 2 decades, there's been sort of a resurgence in interest to reevaluate this piece of our art history. Much like what I'm hoping to do with Alvin Constant, is sort of look at these artists whose work would, because of the context of when it was shown or how it was done, has fallen through the cracks and hasn't been considered to be worthy of our art history. But more and more people are starting to realize that there is real merit to it. And these artists really did do competent art. And the value of it is there, not just intrinsically. At the gallery, we're lucky. We got a lot of women artists in our collection. And the reason we have them is because they haven't had that commercial value to it. So it was easier to donate them because there wasn't this big dollar figure attached to it. And so it's been a wonderful gift for us to be able to have this archive. And I'd probably say the majority of our collection is focused on the work of women artists. And so more and more scholars and individuals are sort of looking into this history and starting to document it. And Julia appears in this book here. I'm Not Myself at All, Women, Art, and Subjectivity in Canada, which is published by the McGill Queen's Press in 2018. As I mentioned, there was down in South Africa, there was a curator who's retiring, and in the university's magazine they did a profile of him on his retirement, and in it, one of the things he mentioned out were the 11 miniature watercolors that they have in their collection by Julia Bullock-Webster, which I thought was really quite wonderful. And then I mentioned the garden at the gristmill there, and in the 55th annual report of the Okanagan Historical Society in 1991, they did a feature on the gristmill and talked a little bit about the Julia Bullock-Webster flower garden down there as well. The BC Archives has all the diaries that I mentioned again. If you want to go down there and look them up yourself, you can go down there and there's the information there. And and then in 2017, I think it was, 2016, the Summerland Gardens had their, I think it was their centenary, and we were asked to do a little exhibition of Julia Bullock-Webster's work up there, and they did a little Victorian tea in her honor there as well to celebrate that. Oh yeah, I was going to say, go down and visit the gardens and help them out. I don't know why that, there you are. Oh, there are. So go down there. Oh, this is what it was. This was a video, but unfortunately it doesn't work. During COVID, Chris Matheson did a beautiful engagement part, as did many museums. And if you go online or go to their website, there's a beautiful little video presentation he did talking about Julia Bullock-Webster and the family's connection to the gristmill. And you can check that out online on day 31, the 29th of May, 2020, he did that video. And then, yeah, this is another video. There you are. You can go online as well, Christine Pilgrim's website, and you can get a sample of the play that she did. Here she was on, it's called A Tale of Pioneering Women, and she was featured on Global Okanagan's Pioneers and Places program with Mike Roberts, and you can get a sample of the video there and hear in her voice about it, a bit of her interpretation of Julia Bullock-Webster as well. But I also wanted to just touch upon another artist, which was interesting. As I mentioned, James Douglas was the first lieutenant governor of British Columbia. He was a black man, and it's interesting. We have a large history of African American black history here in British Columbia that a lot of people don't realize. Salt Spring Island had a large population there in the 1880s as well, and another black man that came up here was a gentleman by the name of Grafton Tyler Brown. And he was born in 1841 to two free slave parents. And he traveled across the United States, and he ended up in British Columbia around 1881, I think, 1882. And he documented his travels here in British Columbia. And recently the University of Victoria has done a large sort of a survey of his work, because a couple of his pieces have come up for auction and be discovered. But interestingly enough, in the and he's considered one of British Columbia's first professional artists, and he had a major exhibition. But when he was very light, he was lighter skinned, and when he moved into Canada, he passed himself off as being white. And then got back to the United States and was celebrated down there again, but was an illustrator and all this. This is a photo of him in his studio in 1883, and this painting back here, I believe, is the Okanagan. But here's some of his paintings. So this is 10 years before Julia Bullock-Webster arrived. So there were other artists that were traveling through here, but what I liked about him is he, again, would have been an artist that was living on the fringes, a marginalized artist. At the time, as much as he was celebrated, he was still suffering from the effects of the American Civil War and the slavery and everything else. And so, yeah, for him to come here to be passing as white passing certainly tells a lot about the difficulties that he had there. And but here we are. This is Long Lake, Kalamalka Lake, 1883. This is in the collection of the BC Archives, oil on canvas. And again, it's remarkable to see this, because it's hard to think about this landscape without anything on it, with no structures, all the built-up development that you see today, and the little goat path there of a road. This is one here. This is unknown, but this is a painting that it was on his easel in that photo there in Victoria. Valley of the Similkameen, 1883. This was part of a catalog of an exhibition he had in Victoria. Thundering Storm, Shuswap Lake, September 28th, 1882. And the thing about it, the interesting thing is, like, you can find this guy's work. Like, if you go to Value Village or the Sally Ann, like, his work can show up because nobody knows who it is, and it's just an old painting in a home. You know, up in Vernon, probably more so than down here, because you do have, you had a lot of gentry that would come there and live there in the 1880s and in the 1800s and the 1900s, and would commission these paintings or purchase them and have them in their homes, and you know, families get passed down and people don't want that old dusty painting anymore.
Did he sign his work?
He did, yep. I think maybe the one coming up here, maybe you can see the signature in it, but there's a whole beautiful website on UVic's website, the University of Victoria, Grafton Tyler Brown, you can check out, and they've got a whole thing about all the known paintings he did in British Columbia, the ones that they know where they're at, and ones that they're still trying to find, and they give you a full list of them, and so it's not implausible. So 1882 view of Lake Okanagan. This one here, this is what sort of started the whole kit and caboodle of trying to re-examine his own life and all this. This piece here was, this is near Armstrong, Enderby, sorry, A.L. Fortune's farm. A friend of mine, a gentleman by the name of Tony Westbridge, who owns Westbridge Fine Art in Vancouver, came up here and they would do these like antique appraisal days. We did a couple of the gallery a number of years ago, and they would set up and you could bring down your treasures and they'll try to tell you what you have. And they did one up in Vernon, and a family walked in with this painting off their wall that they knew nothing about, and it was discovering this piece, and certainly opened up people sort of wanting to figure out more about this guy and who he was. And he sold this at his auction for, I think, $25,000 to Uno Langman, who 3 years later sold to the Royal BC Museum for $55,000. Remarkable, but anyhow, 1883. This one here is, the title of this is View of the Trail Between Penticton and Princeton, BC, from the camp at the head of Keremeos Creek, 13th of October, 1883, oil on board. Unfortunately, this piece did come up for auction in a sale down in Louisiana or something like that, and I tried to buy it for our collection. And unfortunately, I was a little short. It sold for like $2,300. But it would have been a lovely piece to have here because it would have been one of the earliest depictions of this area around here. But so I don't know where it's gone now. But you know, it's not the most dynamic painting, but certainly historically, it's certainly pretty remarkable. But anyhow, it was beyond what I could afford. And I guess that's it. So thank you all very much. I do have this here if you want to have a look at this piece here. And look at that. I went through 74 slides. Amazing. Thank you very much. And if you want to come have a look at the argillite plate, if you want to have a look at Julia's two of her watercolors, they're right here. And love you to see it. And you get a real sense of the detail because the slides, unfortunately, don't do it any justice at all. Is there any questions anybody has or comments or thoughts? Does anybody want to come down to the gallery and help me identify what all these plant species are? Perfect. Thank you. Lovely. I'll give you my card. There we are.